The afternoon sun hung heavy in the sky, turning the asphalt of the small-town diner parking lot into a shimmering mirror of heat. It was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons where time seemed to move slower than usual. The kind of day where most people were either inside enjoying air conditioning or finding shade wherever they could get it. Maya sat on the concrete curb outside Riley's diner, her legs pulled up close to her chest, arms wrapped around her knees. She was only 15 years old with bright, curious eyes that usually sparkled with enthusiasm. But today they were tired. Her mother had been working a double shift inside the diner, and Maya had already been waiting for 3 hours. She didn't complain, though. She never did. Money was tight, and her mom worked hard to make sure they had everything they needed. In her lap sat a worn backpack, unzipped just enough to reveal the spines of several library books. Most of them were about ocean life, coral reefs, and marine ecosystems. Maya was absolutely obsessed with the ocean. Despite living hundreds of miles away from any coastline, she dreamed of becoming a marine biologist one day, imagining herself diving deep into blue waters, discovering new species, and helping to protect the creatures that lived beneath the waves. Her notebook was filled with sketches of dolphins, sea turtles, and tropical fish. It was her escape, her happy place. She pulled out one of the books and tried to read, but the heat made it difficult to concentrate. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she used the edge of her t-shirt to wipe it away. The diner's door opened and closed periodically, releasing brief bursts of cool air and the smell of French fries and coffee. Her stomach growled. She still had an hour to wait. The peaceful afternoon was suddenly shattered by the deep rumble of motorcycle engines. Maya looked up from her book to see a group of 5 motorcycles turning into the parking lot. The sound was deafening, echoing off the buildings and drowning out everything else. The bikes were massive, chrome gleaming in the sunlight, exhaust pipes roaring like angry beasts. The riders wore leather vests covered in patches and insignias. Their boots were heavy, chains hung from their belts, and most of them had bandanas tied around their heads or faces. They looked like they'd ridden straight out of a movie about outlaw bikers. The motorcycles lined up in a row, taking up several parking spaces near where Maya sat. Maya felt her stomach tighten. She'd learned over the years to recognize certain situations, to sense when trouble might be coming. She made herself smaller, hoping they wouldn't notice her. She dropped her eyes back to her book, pretending to read even though her heart was now beating faster. The engines cut off one by one, and the sudden silence felt almost as loud as the noise had been. The riders dismounted, stretching their legs and talking among themselves. Their voices were rough and loud, filled with the kind of crude humor that came from spending too much time on the road together. The leader of the group was a man named Derek. He was in his early 40s, with a face that looked like it had seen too many fights. A jagged scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheek. His arms were covered in faded tattoos, and his leather vest bore patches that proclaimed him the president of his motorcycle club. He had the kind of presence that demanded attention, and not in a good way. There was something mean about his eyes, something cold that suggested he enjoyed making people uncomfortable. Derek pulled off his sunglasses and surveyed the parking lot like he owned it. His gaze swept across the few parked cars past the diner's windows, and then landed on Maya sitting alone on the curb. He stared at her for a long moment, and Maya felt her skin prickle with unease. "Well, well, well," Derek said loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "What do we have here?" Maya kept her eyes on her book, her hands gripping the pages so tightly they began to crumple. "Don't look up," she told herself. "Just ignore them and they'll go away." But Derek wasn't the kind of man to be ignored. He nudged one of his friends and pointed in Maya's direction. "You see that?" he said, loud enough for everyone in the parking lot to hear. Sitting there with her little books, thinking she's something special, the other bikers looked over, some of them chuckling nervously. They knew Derek's moods, knew when he was looking for entertainment at someone else's expense. Derek walked closer to where Maya sat, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement. "Hey girl," he called out. "I'm talking to you." Maya finally looked up, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't say anything, just met his gaze for a brief second before looking away again. "Oh, so you can hear me," Derek said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Thought maybe you couldn't understand English or something." His friends laughed, though some of the laughter sounded forced. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, but it wasn't from the sun. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the concrete and vanish. She glanced toward the diner's entrance, hoping her mother might come out, but the door remained closed. Derek continued his assault, making comments about her hair, criticizing the way she dressed, and then saying things that made it clear his hatred was about something she couldn't control and shouldn't have to defend: the color of her skin. He used words that made her flinch, words that carried centuries of pain and prejudice behind them. Tears began to well up in Maya's eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry, but it was hard, so hard. She was just a kid, sitting outside waiting for her mom, reading books about the ocean. She hadn't done anything to anyone. Other people in the parking lot noticed what was happening. A couple loading groceries into their car glanced over, their faces showing discomfort. An elderly man getting into his truck paused, his hand on the door handle, watching the scene unfold. A woman with 2 small children hurried them into the diner faster, pulling them close. But nobody said anything. Nobody intervened. They all looked away, suddenly very interested in their own business. It was easier that way. Safer. Getting involved with a group of intimidating bikers wasn't something most people wanted to do. Derek fed off the attention, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. He was performing now, showing off for his friends and asserting his dominance. This was his territory, and he could do whatever he wanted, or so he thought. Maya clutched her backpack tighter, her knuckles turning white. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but more followed. Her dreams of swimming with dolphins and exploring coral reefs felt very far away in this moment. The ugliness of the world had crashed into her peaceful afternoon, and there was nothing she could do about it. The sun continued to beat down mercilessly. The smell of hot asphalt mixed with motorcycle exhaust. Derek's voice carried across the parking lot, each word a small violence, and Maya sat there small and vulnerable, wondering why people could be so cruel, wondering if anyone would help her, wondering if this was just how the world worked. What none of them knew. Not Derek with his cruel smile, not his uncomfortable friends, not the bystanders who looked away, and not even Maya herself, was that someone was watching, someone who had spent his entire career standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves, someone who was about to change everything. 3 parking spaces away from where Derek was tormenting Maya, there sat a black SUV with tinted windows. The vehicle had been parked there for about 20 minutes and nobody had paid it much attention. It was the kind of SUV that looked expensive but not flashy, the type that blended into any parking lot across America. Inside the vehicle sat a man who was trying to enjoy a few precious moments of anonymity. He wore a simple baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, a plain gray t-shirt and dark sunglasses. His muscular frame was relaxed in the driver's seat, and he held a cup of coffee from the diner in one hand. This was John Cena, though at this moment he was hoping nobody would recognize him. John had spent the morning at a children's hospital 2 towns over, visiting sick kids as part of his ongoing commitment to various charitable causes. He'd made over 650 wishes come true through the Make-A-Wish Foundation over the years, more than any other celebrity in the program's history. But he didn't do it for recognition or publicity. He did it because he genuinely believed in making a difference, in bringing light to dark situations, in standing up for people who needed someone in their corner. The hospital visit had been emotionally draining, as they always were. He'd hugged children fighting cancer, laughed with kids who'd been told they might never walk again, and held the hand of a little boy who just wanted to meet his hero one last time. John carried those moments with him always. They reminded him why his platform mattered, why being famous meant having a responsibility to do good. After leaving the hospital, he'd just wanted a quiet drive and a decent cup of coffee. No cameras, no crowds, no interviews, just a normal afternoon like a normal person. He'd pulled into Riley's diner because it looked like the kind of small-town place where nobody would bother him. He'd been right initially. He'd gone in, ordered his coffee, exchanged pleasantries with the waitress who didn't seem to recognize him, and returned to his vehicle to sit and decompress before continuing his drive. He'd rolled down his windows to let in the fresh air despite the heat. The breeze felt good after being in sterile hospital rooms all morning. He was scrolling through messages on his phone, replying to his team about upcoming commitments when the motorcycles roared into the parking lot. John looked up briefly as the bikes parked. He'd been around bikers before, Some were good people who just loved the freedom of the road. Others were looking for trouble. He watched them dismount, trying to gauge what kind of group this was, then returned his attention to his phone. Not his business, but then Derek's voice cut through the afternoon air, loud and aggressive. John glanced up again and saw the teenage girl sitting on the curb. She looked small and scared, trying to make herself invisible. Something about the scene made John's jaw tighten. He'd seen enough bullying in his life to recognize it instantly. He set his phone down and watched more carefully now. Derek was walking toward the girl, his body language aggressive, his voice mocking. Even from inside his vehicle, John could hear some of what was being said. His grip tightened on his coffee cup. John had been bullied as a kid. He knew exactly what it felt like to be targeted, to be made fun of for things you couldn't control. He'd been scrawny once, believe it or not. Before the muscles and the fame, he'd been a skinny kid who got pushed around. Those experiences had shaped him, had driven him to become stronger, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. They'd taught him that the strongest thing a person could do was stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. As Derek's verbal assault continued, John noticed something that made his blood run cold. The girl had tears running down her face. She was just a kid, maybe 14 or 15 years old, and this grown man was terrorizing her. And the content of Derek's words, the specific nature of his mockery, made it clear this wasn't just generic bullying. This was racial hatred, pure and ugly. John looked around the parking lot. Other people were clearly aware of what was happening. A couple by their car, an old man by his truck, people going in and out of the diner. Everyone could see and hear what was going on, but nobody was doing anything. They were all looking away, finding excuses to mind their own business. That was the part that bothered John almost as much as the bullying itself. The bystander effect, good people allowing bad things to happen, because they didn't want to get involved, didn't want to make waves, didn't want to put themselves at risk. He understood it. He really did. Those bikers looked intimidating. Getting involved could be dangerous. It was easier and safer to pretend you didn't notice. But John had never been good at taking the easy road. His entire career had been built on the motto, never give up, and that applied to life just as much as it applied to wrestling. You didn't give up on yourself, and you didn't give up on other people who needed help. He watched as Derek's friends laughed, some more enthusiastically than others. He could tell that even among the biker group, some of them were uncomfortable with what their leader was doing. But they weren't stopping him either. They were going along with it because that's what you did in a group like that. You followed the leader even when the leader was wrong. The girl wiped tears from her face, trying to be discreet about it. She clutched a backpack to her chest like it was a shield. John could see library books spilling out of the top. She was a student, probably waiting for a parent. Just a kid trying to mind her own business. And now she was being subjected to this hatred for no reason other than existing in a space that Derek felt belonged to him. John had given hundreds of speeches over the years about respect, about treating people with kindness, about standing up against bullying. He'd visited schools and talked to kids about having courage. He'd made public service announcements about accepting differences. But all the speeches in the world meant nothing if he didn't live those values himself when it mattered. He set his coffee cup in the holder and removed his sunglasses, folding them carefully and placing them on the dashboard. Then he took off his baseball cap, running a hand through his short hair. His distinctive features were now clearly visible to anyone who looked. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. John took a deep breath and opened his car door. The sound of Derek's voice was louder now, and he could hear every cruel word. The biker was really laying into this poor girl, his voice dripping with contempt and hatred. The girl was crying openly now, no longer trying to hide it. As John stepped out of his SUV, his 6'1" frame unfolding from the driver's seat, he felt that familiar feeling he got before stepping into a wrestling ring, that mix of adrenaline and purpose, that certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. His boots hit the pavement, and he stood there for just a moment, taking in the full scene. Derek had his back to John, still focused on tormenting Maya. The other bikers were watching their leader, some laughing, some looking uncomfortable. The bystanders were still pretending not to notice, though a few were stealing glances. John started walking toward the scene, his stride purposeful and confident. He was a big man, heavily muscled from years of training and performing. Even in casual clothes, he was imposing. But it wasn't his size that made him intimidating in this moment. It was the look on his face, the set of his jaw, the steel in his eyes that said he wasn't going to tolerate what he was witnessing. One of the bikers noticed him first. The man's eyes went wide with recognition, and he nudged the person next to him, whispering urgently. A ripple of awareness began spreading through the group. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Derek's friends were suddenly very aware that someone was approaching, someone who commanded attention just by walking. But Derek himself was too caught up in his performance to notice. He was still facing Maya, still spewing his hatred, still feeding off the power trip of terrorizing someone weaker than himself. He had no idea what was about to happen, no idea that his comfortable position of dominance was about to be challenged, no idea that his afternoon was about to take a very different turn than he'd planned. John continued walking, closing the distance between himself and the confrontation. His expression was calm but firm. He wasn't rushing, wasn't aggressive, but there was an undeniable authority in his movement, a sense that something was about to change. The parking lot seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. John walked with steady, measured steps across the hot pavement. Each footfall seemed to echo in the parking lot, though in reality it was just the sudden awareness of everyone around them. The other bikers were now fully alert, watching this muscular stranger approach their group. A couple of them tried to catch Derek's attention, but he was too absorbed in his cruel game to notice the warnings. When John was about 10 feet away, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud or aggressive, but it carried a weight that made everyone stop what they were doing. "Is there a problem here?" The question hung in the air, simple but loaded with meaning. Derek spun around, his face still twisted in that ugly smirk, ready to confront whoever was interrupting his fun. But when his eyes landed on John, the smirk faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. His brain was clearly working to process what his eyes were seeing. Standing before him in simple civilian clothes, but unmistakable in appearance, was one of the most recognizable faces in America. The square jaw, the intense eyes, the powerful build. Derek had watched this man on television countless times. His kids had posters of this guy in their bedrooms, and now he was standing right here in this small-town parking lot, looking at Derek with an expression that made it very clear he'd seen and heard everything. We were just... Derek stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like water on the hot pavement. John didn't wait for whatever excuse was about to come out of Derek's mouth. Instead, he turned his attention to Maya, and his entire demeanor shifted. The steel in his expression softened into something gentle and concerned. He walked past Derek like he wasn't even there and approached the girl carefully, mindful not to startle her. Maya looked up at him with red, tear-stained eyes, confusion mixing with recognition on her face. She'd seen this man on TV and movies, heard about all the good things he did, but she couldn't quite process why he was here now in her moment of humiliation. John knelt down on one knee so he was at eye level with her, not towering over her. His voice was soft and kind, a complete contrast to the harsh words she'd been hearing moments before. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded automatically, the way kids do when adults ask them questions, even when the answer isn't true, but fresh tears were rolling down her cheeks, betraying her words. "It's all right," John continued, his voice warm and reassuring. "You don't have to pretend. What just happened wasn't okay. Not even a little bit. But I want you to know that you didn't do anything wrong. Nothing at all. You understand me?" Maya nodded again, this time more genuinely. There was something about his presence, his obvious sincerity, that made her feel safe for the first time since the motorcycles had arrived. "You like marine biology?" John asked, noticing the books in her backpack. One of them had a dolphin on the cover. "Yes," Maya managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "That's amazing," John said with a genuine smile. "The ocean needs people who care about it. People who are willing to study hard and make a difference. Don't let anyone make you feel small for having big dreams." He stood up then, and his expression changed as he turned back to face Derek. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something harder. Not anger exactly, but a firm resolve that made it clear he wasn't going anywhere until this situation was addressed properly. Derek and his friends stood in an awkward cluster, none of them quite sure what to do. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Derek, who'd been so confident and aggressive just minutes ago, now looked like a kid caught doing something wrong by a teacher. "So," John said, his voice calm but carrying undeniable authority, "you want to explain to me what I just witnessed? You want to tell me why a grown man thinks it's acceptable to speak to a child that way?" Derek tried to puff up his chest, to reclaim some of his earlier bravado. "Look, man, I don't know who you think you are, but this ain't your business. We were just having a little fun, that's all. No harm meant. No harm meant," John repeated, his eyebrows rising. "That girl has tears running down her face because of your fun. You were mocking her, degrading her, using language that has no place in civilized society. And you're calling that fun?" One of the other bikers, a younger guy with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Derek, maybe we should just go. We didn't mean anything by it." Derek shot his friend an angry glare, feeling his authority within the group being challenged. "Shut up, Tommy, I'll handle this," but John wasn't done. He took a step closer to Derek, not threatening, but close enough that the biker had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "You know what I think? I think you're a bully. And I think you pick on people who can't fight back because it makes you feel powerful. But there's nothing powerful about what you just did. There's nothing tough about making a child cry. You don't know anything about me," Derek shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. Around them, people were starting to emerge from the diner. Others in the parking lot had stopped pretending not to notice. Several people had their phones out, recording the confrontation. Derek was starting to realize that this situation wasn't going to end the way he'd planned. John's voice remained steady, but there was passion behind his words now. "I know enough. I know what it's like to be bullied. When I was younger, I wasn't always this size. I was skinny, awkward, different. People made fun of me constantly. They said things that cut deep. Things I still remember decades later. So yeah, I know exactly what you were doing to that girl." He gestured toward Maya, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. She's sitting here with books about the ocean, minding her own business, waiting for her parent. She wasn't bothering anyone. She wasn't doing anything to you. And you decided to target her because, why, because of how she looks? Because of the color of her skin? What possible justification could you have? Derek shifted uncomfortably, aware of the growing audience. Some of his own friends were looking at him with expressions that suggested they weren't entirely on his side anymore. "It was just words," Derek muttered, trying a different approach. "I didn't touch her or anything. Freedom of speech, right?" John shook his head slowly. "Freedom of speech means the government can't arrest you for your words. It doesn't mean there are no consequences. It doesn't mean your words don't hurt people. And it definitely doesn't make what you said right." Tommy, the younger biker who'd spoken up before, stepped forward again. This time he ignored Derek's angry look. He walked over to where Maya was sitting and looked down at her with genuine remorse on his face. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "What happened here wasn't right. I should have said something earlier and I didn't. That makes me part of the problem. I apologize." Maya looked surprised but nodded her acceptance. Tommy's actions seemed to break something open in the group. Another biker, an older man with gray in his beard, removed his sunglasses and shook his head in disgust. "I got grandkids her age," he said, looking at Derek with disappointment. "I raised you better than this, Derek. Your daddy would be ashamed of what you just did." Derek's face flushed red, caught between anger and embarrassment. The situation was spiraling out of his control. He was being called out not just by some celebrity but by his own crew, his own people, and all of it was being recorded by multiple phones. John crossed his arms over his chest. "Here's what's going to happen now. You're going to apologize to this young lady, a real apology, not some half-hearted mumble, and you're going to mean it." "I already said I didn't mean any harm," Derek protested weakly. "That's not an apology," John said firmly. "That's you making excuses. An apology acknowledges what you did wrong, takes responsibility for it, and expresses genuine regret. So let's try this again, and this time, look her in the eye when you speak." The parking lot had gone completely silent except for the distant hum of traffic on the nearby highway. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what Derek would do. He looked around at the cameras, at his disappointed crew members, at John's unwavering gaze, and finally at Maya's tear-streaked face. For a long moment, nobody moved. Derek seemed to be wrestling with himself, pride battling against the reality of his situation. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. His jaw worked as if he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, slowly, Derek took a step toward Maya. His tough guy posture had completely crumbled. He looked tired suddenly, older than his years, like a man facing something he'd been running from for a long time. Derek stood there, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him look smaller somehow. Despite his intimidating size, the hot afternoon sun beat down on all of them, but nobody seemed to notice the heat anymore. All eyes were fixed on this moment, waiting to see if genuine change was possible, or if this was just another performance from a man who'd been performing toughness his whole life. He took another hesitant step toward Maya, then stopped. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. He looked back at John, perhaps hoping for some kind of escape route, but John's expression remained firm and expectant. There was no way out of this except through it. Derek started, his voice rough and uncertain. Look, kid, I'm sorry. The words came out flat and mechanical, like he was reading from a script he didn't believe in. It was the kind of apology people give when they're forced to, when they want to get something over with but don't really feel it in their hearts. John stepped forward immediately. No, he said, his voice cutting through the awkward silence. That's not good enough. She deserves better than that. We all deserve better than that. Derek's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. What do you want from me? He snapped, some of his earlier aggression returning. I said I was sorry. You said words, John corrected him. But an apology without sincerity is just noise. Look at her. Really look at her. She's a 15-year-old kid who is sitting here peacefully, dreaming about her future, and you decided to tear her down for no reason. You made her cry. You made her feel small and scared and unwelcome in her own town. So yes, I want more from you. I want you to actually think about what you did and why it was wrong. The gray-bearded biker, the one who'd mentioned his grandchildren, spoke up again. He's right, Derek. You can't just throw out empty words and expect everyone to move on. That girl's gonna remember this day for the rest of her life. The least you can do is give her an apology that's worth something. Derek looked around at the faces surrounding him. Some showed disappointment, others showed curiosity about whether he was capable of genuine remorse. A few people in the growing crowd looked skeptical, like they'd already written him off as a lost cause. That seemed to bother him more than anything else. You don't understand, Derek said, and his voice had changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that sounded almost like pain. You don't know what it's like growing up the way I did. My old man taught me that the world is divided into us and them, that you gotta be tough, gotta show strength, can't let anyone think you're weak. John's expression softened slightly, but he didn't back down. A lot of us grew up with difficult teachings. A lot of us were raised with ideas that we later realized were wrong, but at some point we become adults and we have to take responsibility for our own choices. You can't hide behind your upbringing forever. I'm not hiding, Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. He ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to be different. Start by being honest, John said. Right here, right now. Why did you really target this girl? What was going on inside you that made you think that was okay? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Derek shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with this level of introspection. The crowd waited, phones still recording, capturing every moment of this strange confrontation in a small-town parking lot. Finally, Derek spoke, his voice quieter than before. I was angry, he admitted. Still am most days. Life didn't turn out the way I thought it would. Lost my job last year. Wife left me 6 months ago. Took the kids with her. I barely get to see them anymore. And when I do, they look at me like they're disappointed, you know? Like I'm not the dad they thought I was. Tommy, the younger biker, looked surprised. You never told us any of that, man. Because I'm supposed to be the leader, Derek said bitterly. The president of the club. I'm supposed to have it all together. Can't show weakness, right? That's what I learned. So instead, I take it out on other people. Make myself feel bigger by making someone else feel smaller. He finally looked directly at Maya. And today, that someone was you. And that's not right. That's not who I want to be. The honesty in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the gruff, aggressive biker from earlier. This was a broken man finally admitting he was broken. Maya watched him with cautious eyes, still protected by John's presence but listening carefully. My daughter's about your age, Derek continued, speaking directly to Maya now. She loves science too, wants to be a veterinarian. And if someone talked to her the way I talk to you, his voice cracked, I'd lose my mind. I'd want to tear them apart. But here I am doing that exact thing to someone else's kid. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, there were actual tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm truly deeply sorry. What I said to you was hateful and wrong. You didn't deserve any of it, none of it. And I can't take it back, but I want you to know that it wasn't about you. It was about me and all my anger and pain and stupidity. You seem like a good kid with big dreams, and I hope to God you don't let what happened here today stop you from chasing those dreams. Maya sat very still, processing what she was hearing. It wasn't the apology she'd expected to get, if she'd expected one at all. It was messy and complicated and painfully human. She could see that Derek was genuinely struggling, that his cruelty had come from a place of deep hurt rather than pure evil. I accept your apology, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears that still clung to her eyelashes. But what you said still hurt. It's going to hurt for a while. I know, Derek said, nodding slowly, and I'll have to live with that. With knowing I added pain to the world instead of something good. John had been watching this exchange carefully, and now he stepped forward again. This is the hardest part of growth, he said, addressing not just Derek but everyone gathered around, facing the ugly truth about ourselves, admitting when we've been wrong. It takes more courage to apologize sincerely than it does to act tough and hide behind aggression. He turned to the crowd that had gathered, dozens of people now, all watching this unexpected moment unfold. I want to talk to all of you for a minute, John said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Because what happened here today isn't just about one man's cruelty, it's about all of us. People shifted uncomfortably, not sure where this was going. When I drove up, I saw what was happening, John continued. I saw a young girl being verbally assaulted by a group of grown men. And you know what else I saw? I saw other people watching. People who knew it was wrong. People who felt uncomfortable, but nobody was doing anything about it. Everyone was looking away, minding their own business, telling themselves it wasn't their problem. An older woman in the crowd looked down at her feet. A man in a business suit suddenly found his car keys very interesting. They all knew he was right. That's how these things keep happening, John said. Not because of the Dereks of the world, though they're part of it, but because good people choose silence, because we tell ourselves that getting involved is dangerous or awkward or not our responsibility. We wait for someone else to step up. But what if there is no someone else? What if we're it? Tommy spoke up, his young face serious. You're right. I was standing right there and I said nothing. I laughed along because I didn't want to go against Derek, didn't want to cause problems in the club. But my silence made me part of it. Mine too, the gray-bearded biker added. Been riding with Derek for 15 years. Should have checked him a long time ago instead of letting things slide. John nodded approvingly. Recognizing that is the first step. The next step is doing better next time. And there will be a next time. Maybe not exactly like this, but there will be moments when you see something wrong happening. Moments when you have to choose between comfort and courage. He looked back at Maya, who was listening intently to everything being said. This young lady showed courage just by sitting here with dignity, while someone tried to tear her down. She didn't fight back with anger or hatred. She held on to herself. That's strength. Maya felt something warm bloom in her chest. In the span of 30 minutes, she'd gone from humiliation to feeling seen and valued by strangers who'd become allies. Derek cleared his throat. What do I do now? He asked, and the question seemed directed at everyone and no one. How do I fix this? How do I fix myself? John considered the question carefully. That's work you have to do, and it won't happen overnight, but maybe start by examining where your anger really comes from. Consider talking to someone professional about it. Reconnect with your kids not as the tough guy you think you're supposed to be, but as a real person with real feelings. And when you see someone being treated badly, be the person who steps up instead of the person causing harm. And maybe, Tommy added, we as a club need to think about what we stand for. Are we just about looking tough and riding bikes? Or do we want to actually mean something positive in our communities? The conversation in the parking lot continued as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. What had started as a confrontation had transformed into something unexpected, something that felt almost like a community gathering. More people had emerged from the diner, drawn by the commotion, but they stayed because something meaningful was happening. This wasn't just entertainment. This was real life, messy and complicated and somehow beautiful in its honesty. John pulled out his phone and looked at Maya. Do you mind if I get your contact information? Maybe an email address? He asked gently. I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay with you and your mom. Maya's eyes widened. Really? You want to stay in touch with me? Absolutely, John said with a warm smile. You've got big dreams about marine biology, right? I know some people who work in ocean conservation. I can't promise anything, but maybe I can connect you with folks who can give you advice, point you toward programs and opportunities. Dreams are important, but so are the connections that help make those dreams real. Before Maya could respond, the diner door swung open and a woman in a waitress uniform came rushing out, her face filled with concern. This was Maya's mother, and she'd finally gotten word that something was happening in the parking lot involving her daughter. She'd been in the middle of taking an order when another waitress told her she needed to get outside immediately. Maya, she called out, hurrying over. Baby, what's going on? Are you okay? Maya stood up quickly. Mom, I'm fine. I'm okay now. Her mother looked around at the scene, taking in the bikers, the crowd, the phones recording, and most surprisingly, the unmistakable figure of John Cena standing protectively near her daughter. Her expression cycled through confusion, concern, and complete bewilderment. John extended his hand to her. Ma'am, I'm John. Your daughter is safe. There was an incident, but it's been handled. Maya showed remarkable composure during a difficult situation. Maya's mother shook his hand automatically, still trying to process what was happening. An incident? What kind of incident? Maya took her mother's hand. Some of these men said some mean things to me, really mean things. But then he showed up. She gestured to John, and he stood up for me. And then they apologized. It was scary for a while, but it's okay now. Her mother's face hardened as she turned to look at Derek and his crew. The protective anger of a parent whose child has been threatened was written all over her features. Who said mean things to my daughter? What exactly happened here? Derek stepped forward, looking more uncomfortable than ever. Apologizing to a teenager was one thing. Facing her mother was something else entirely. Ma'am, that was me. I said things I shouldn't have. Terrible things. There's no excuse for it. I've already apologized to your daughter, but I owe you an apology too. As a parent myself, I know how I'd feel if someone spoke to my kids that way. I'm deeply sorry. Maya's mother studied Derek's face, searching for sincerity. She was a woman who'd worked hard her whole life, who'd raised her daughter alone after Maya's father left when she was just a baby. She'd taught Maya to be strong, to be kind, to reach for her dreams despite all the obstacles the world would put in her way. And now she had to decide whether to accept this apology from a stranger who'd hurt her child. My daughter is the best thing in my life, she said finally, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. She studies hard. She's kind to everyone she meets, and she dreams of making the world better through her work with ocean life. For you to tear her down, to make her feel less than what she is, that's something I'm going to have trouble forgiving. I understand, Derek said quietly. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was. Maya's mother turned to John. Thank you for protecting her, for standing up when others wouldn't. That means more than you could possibly know. It's what anyone should have done, John replied. Your daughter is clearly special. She's got a bright future ahead of her. He pulled a card from his wallet and handed it to Maya. This has my email on it. I mean what I said about staying in touch. Send me a message, tell me about your studies, let me know how I can help. And not just with career stuff. If you ever need advice, or if you're facing another situation where someone's trying to make you feel small, you reach out. Deal? Maya took the card with trembling hands, holding it like it was made of gold. Deal, she whispered, then louder. Thank you. For everything. John turned back to the crowd that had gathered. I want everyone here to remember what happened today. Remember that words have power. They can hurt or heal, tear down or build up. And remember that silence in the face of injustice is its own form of participation. We all have a responsibility to speak up, to stand up, to be better. One of the people in the crowd, a middle-aged man in work clothes, raised his hand tentatively. I was here when it started, he admitted. I saw what was happening and I didn't do anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. But you're right. I should have said something. I should have done something. The fact that you're recognizing that now matters, John said. Growth starts with awareness. Next time you'll make a different choice. A young woman with a toddler on her hip spoke up. I rushed my kid inside because I didn't want him to see the confrontation. But what I should have done was show him what it looks like to stand up for what's right. I want him to grow up brave, but how can he learn that if I'm not modeling it? More people began sharing their thoughts, their regrets, their commitments to do better. The parking lot had become an impromptu town hall, a moment of collective reflection sparked by one man's cruelty and another man's courage. Tommy, the young biker, pulled out his own phone. "I'm going to share something," he announced. "I recorded some of what happened here today, including Derek's real apology and what John said about standing up. I want to post it online, but only if that's okay with everyone involved, especially Maya." Maya looked at her mother, who considered for a moment before nodding. "If it helps other people understand why speaking up matters, then yes. Just make sure the focus is on the message, not on humiliating anyone," John added. "The point isn't to destroy Derek or make him into a villain for internet entertainment. The point is to show that change is possible, that accountability matters, and that we all have a role to play in creating a kinder world." Tommy nodded seriously. "I understand. I'll make sure it's about the lesson, not the shame." Over the next hour, something remarkable happened in that parking lot. People didn't just disperse and go about their business. They stayed and talked. Strangers shared stories about times they'd been bullied, or times they'd stood by and done nothing, or times they'd found the courage to speak up. Derek and his biker crew didn't leave either. They became part of the conversation, listening and contributing and slowly beginning to understand the impact of their actions and attitudes. The gray-bearded biker, whose name turned out to be Frank, suggested that their motorcycle club get involved in community service. "We've been riding together for years, but what have we actually done that matters? Maybe it's time we used our presence for good instead of just intimidation." The idea sparked enthusiasm among the other members. They talked about organizing charity rides, volunteering at youth centers, becoming mentors to kids who needed positive male role models. Derek listened to it all with a thoughtful expression, occasionally nodding or adding his own ideas. John eventually had to excuse himself. He had a long drive ahead and commitments waiting for him in the next city. But before he left, he spent a few more minutes with Maya, encouraging her to stay focused on her education and reminding her that one bad experience didn't define her or her worth. "You know what I've learned in my career?" John asked her. "The people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who feel smallest themselves. Don't ever let someone else's insecurity become your burden to carry. You keep reaching for those ocean dreams." Maya hugged him, something she never imagined she'd do when she woke up that morning. "I will. I promise." As John walked back to his SUV, the crowd spontaneously began to applaud. It wasn't the roar of an arena full of wrestling fans. It was something quieter but somehow more meaningful. It was the appreciation of regular people who'd witnessed something that reminded them of their better selves. John waved, got in his vehicle, and drove away. But the impact of what had happened continued to ripple outward. In the days that followed, Tommy posted his video online, carefully edited to focus on the lessons rather than the sensationalism. It went viral within hours. Millions of people watched Derek's transformation from bully to remorseful human being. They heard John's words about bystander responsibility. They saw Maya's quiet dignity throughout the ordeal. The video sparked conversations across the country. Schools used it as a teaching tool for discussions about bullying and racism. Community groups organized events focused on standing up for others. Derek's motorcycle club followed through on their commitment to community service, eventually becoming known in their region for their charitable work, rather than their intimidating presence. Derek himself began attending therapy to deal with his anger and the pain he'd been carrying. He started the difficult work of examining his beliefs and prejudices, understanding where they came from and why they were wrong. It wasn't easy or quick, but he kept at it. He reached out to his ex-wife and kids, being honest with them about his struggles and his commitment to change. Slowly, carefully, he began rebuilding those relationships. Maya continued her studies with renewed determination. She sent regular emails to John, updating him on her progress, her challenges, her victories. True to his word, he connected her with marine biologists and conservation organizations. When she applied to colleges 3 years later, she had letters of recommendation from professionals John had introduced her to, and she received a full scholarship to study marine biology at a prestigious university. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the ordinary people who'd been in that parking lot or who watched the video later. They started speaking up more. When they saw someone being mistreated, they remembered that afternoon and found their voices. They stopped telling themselves that it wasn't their business or that someone else would handle it. They became the someone else. A year after the incident, Riley's Diner put up a small plaque near where everything had happened. It read, "On this spot, a community learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to do what's right despite it. Stand up, speak out, be the change." Maya visited that plaque whenever she came home from college. She'd run her fingers over the words and remember not just the fear and hurt of that day, but also the unexpected kindness, the transformation she'd witnessed, and the lesson she'd learned about the power of one person's willingness to stand up. She'd also remember John's parting words to her, words she carried into every challenge she faced. Never give up. Not on your dreams, not on other people, and most importantly, never give up on believing that the world can be better. Because people like you, Maya, people with courage and compassion and big dreams, you're the ones who make it better. And she believed him. She believed that one person could make a difference. She'd seen it happen in a parking lot on a hot afternoon when a stranger decided that silence wasn't an option, and that a frightened girl deserved a champion. That belief, more than anything else that happened that day, changed her life forever.